and welcome to No Off Season. I'm Zena Cada.
I'm Sabreena Merchant.
And I'm Ben Pickman.
And today on the show, the WNBA is growing. It's officially official. Starting in 2028, Cleveland will be home to the newest WNBA franchise, with Detroit and Philadelphia jumping into the mix in subsequent years. Whew, we got a lot to get into. I know that Ben and Sabreena have been incredibly busy as of this morning. But first, let's dig into some news around the W around this weekend. And All-Star votes are in. It's official. Not much surprise here, with the two highest fan vote totals, Caitlin Clark and Napheesa Collier, have been named WNBA All-Star captains. A first for each of them, though not the first times making the game. So Caitlin Clark and Napheesa Collier are going to be the captains. We know that. And apparently, we also now know who the starters are. Ben, I hear you just got the information that everyone else will be reacting to very soon.
That is true. And one of the things that sticks out is, though Caitlin Clark received the most fan votes, she was not actually the number one player in terms of the overall weighted score. So we should say that starters are announced, 50% fan vote, 25% media vote, 25% a player vote. And so she was not even the number one guard in terms of weighted rank. The number one guard in terms of weighted score. Sabreena, do you want to take a guess?
Just based on who was atop the fan vote, I'm going to say Sabreena Scale.
It was Paige Beckers. Paige Beckers is an all-star starter. Number one in rated.
First-time All-Star.
First-time All-Star.
Weighted. God, Industrial Complex strikes again.
That is
That's
correct.
amazing.
Paige Beckers, number 2 in fan vote, number 5 in media, number 4 in player with a weighted score of 3.25. The other three starting guards, Caitlin Clark, Sabreena Scale, and Alicia Gray. Was your fourth starting guard with a weighted score of 4. Skylar Diggins, she was 9th on fan, 4th on media, 3rd on player. On the front court,
Seattle base, what's going on?
Yeah, it's true.
Sorry, go ahead.
Napheesa Collier had the overall number 1 weighted score, 1.5 overall. Asia Wilson, the second highest weighted score of any player, 2. Asia was 3rd on fan, 1st on media, 1st on player. The other 4 front court starters, Brianna Stewart, Aaliyah Boston, Neko Gumake, and Satu Sabali. First player out was Angel Reese. 5th on fan, she was 12th on media and 12th on player. So those are your 10 starters.
Forward votes, you and me both, Ben, right? That ran in that round table on Monday.
Correct,
So
and those are the same 6.
So Paige Beckers, you said, what did she get in the media and player votes?
Yeah, she was 5th on media and 4th on player.
4th on player, Paige Beckers.
That's amazing.
So that means first on player among guards was who?
Alicia Gray was first on player.
Alicia Gray, that's great. Okay, second was...
Followed by Sabreena, followed by Skylar, followed by Paige.
Wow. Kayla McBride, nobody likes her. That's tough.
We should say, in what was announced on Monday, the 5th player ranked guard not appearing on the list. So, could it be a Kayla McBride? Could it be... Yeah, I mean, she seems to be the most likely player.
Right.
Fascinating. Paige Beckers, all-star starter. Bring it.
Where did Kelsey Mitchell end up?
Kelsey Mitchell was the 5th guard, so your kind of first guard not in.
Got it.
I assume she did well in the fan vote.
Well in fan, well in player, not as well in media. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, right? Like, good for Paige. She ranks 11th in the league in scoring right now, 6th in assists, leading rookies in both categories. She had that great game against Phoenix. But I think that will be the headline here, that, she makes it as a starter in her first
Paige is a more
appearance.
deserving all-star than Sonia Citron. That's wild. Okay.
I don't know. I'm not surprised by this at all. I think I'm only surprised
by the 4th on the player vote. That is much higher than I would have expected this early in her career.
I don't know. She's doing it a lot of ways, and she's been pretty consistent since she came back, which I think, I don't know. Where did Sonia Citron end up? That's actually a good question.
Also not listed.
Also
not listed.
I mean, I knew Paige was going to do well in the fan vote. To get to 2nd among guards is good work by the Paige fans. But Whew.
Good for her.
Good luck to every
That's
other
cool.
WNBA guard trying to make the All-Star team over the next 15 years. spots.
Yeah.
There are 2 spots available for you.
And then Angel being the first one out, I wonder, Kiki Iriafen, where'd she end up?
She was 8th. She was the second forward out. Forwards, honestly, a decent
Seems
gap
like a good
between
list.
6 and 7.
I thought one of the really coolest parts about this entire voting situation, especially when it came to the fan vote, that pretty much the top players in the WNBA All-Star vote situation got as many votes individually as total combined votes in years past. This is participation, this is growth, this is interest, and shout out to all the fans that partook in that. I think that's the word, partook. Anywho, the reserves will be chosen by the WNBA coaches later next weekend. And 1 week from today on July 8th, Clark and Collier will get to draft their teams. Exciting stuff. But you know what time it is now. It's time for the Sabreena Scale. Sabreena, how you doing today? How's your scale feeling today?
I'm thinking about when it has to turn to 18 teams and just a little anxious, but, for now,
Ooh.
13, it works. It works.
Yeah, right. Don't have to worry about that until 2030. But there's been a little bit of movement in the 13 that you have for this week. You got New York sliding down from 3 to 5. Seattle sliding down from 4 to 7. But Atlanta moving on up. They went from 5 to 3. And Valkyries cracked the top 5. Shout out the Bay. So what's on your mind? What made these movements for you?
So I think the best game actually I've watched all season came this weekend between Minnesota and Atlanta. And even though Atlanta ended up losing that game to the Lynx, losing to the number 1 team in the league in overtime doesn't really disappoint me that much. I think the effort was there, and seeing how Atlanta came back from a pretty large deficit in the first half against the Lynx, just the clutch time execution I thought was so good on both sides. This is a rare instance of Cheryl Reeve using 2 challenges in the final minutes, and both of them coming up successful on overturned fouls. Just a masterclass in coaching from the reigning coach of the year. So I think that dream performance combined with then beating the Liberty on Sunday is what, vaults them up a couple spots. But if you're looking at the Lynx and saying, oh, well, they lost earlier this week, well, that was without Napheesa Collier. And I think what they did in the games afterwards is well deserving of maintaining that number 1 spot.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm looking at the way that the Dream also scored 52 points in the paint in comparison to Minnesota's 24. Yes, they took the L, but solid showing inside for sure.
I mean, it just comes down to Atlanta is still very much learning how to win these close games against the league's upper echelon. And it was something we saw in their Commissioner's Cup loss to New York, a game that had they won, Atlanta would be in the Commissioner's Cup, which we should say the championship is Tuesday night. So today, when you are listening to this podcast. But had Atlanta beat New York a couple weeks back, the first time these teams played, they would have been in the title game. As a result, they are not, because they lost that game. They did, of course, as you mentioned, Sabreena, get revenge over the weekend. But you're totally right. Like, Atlanta continues to compete. We see them late game situations. They're still very much learning what lineup combinations are best to trot out there. And we should say Ryan Howard, we don't know the extent of her injury. She left their game against New York with an injury. There's a little bit of questions, too, about who's producing, right, on a game-to-game basis. Very much in that Minnesota game. I want to say all but 12 points that the Dream scored were by their starters, right? Though we know the Dream also have a pretty good bench. Naz Hillman, Maya Caldwell, Nia Coffey. Like, they have Tahina Papau, a number of contributors. So they're figuring it out still, but I agree with you on the instinct to move them up, because I think the Dream have shown that they can certainly compete with the league's upper echelon here.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a tussle between really playoff-like teams. I mean, if the energy was there, you saw the bumping and the battling a little bit. And to your point, Ben, bench points were not the factor here. These were the starters. These were the big stars going up against each other, only 12 to 13 in terms of bench point comparison there. So I'm excited for whenever these teams get back together. I'm particularly excited for more content of Napheesa Collier telling Ryan Howard, calm down. As if she's talking to, someone within her family. It was so
like Mila.
funny.
Yeah.
To Mila, right, exactly. I'm sure Alex Wiesel also gets those same kind of but it was just so funny seeing the dynamic between the two of them and just the entire team. You could tell that these teams want to duel it out next time around. Okay, let's also talk about the Valkyries, because you moved them up, cracked the top 5. What was going on there? What did you see? I know what I saw, but I want to know, what did you see?
I just continue to be supremely impressed by how good the home court advantage is at the Chase Center, or, Valhalla, I guess is how we should be putting it. We don't really need to call it the Chase Center anymore. It's Valhalla.
Nope. It's Valhalla.
I was tempted to look into which teams have the biggest home road disparity, just because it seems like the Golden State crowd gives them, a boost unlike any other. They do have one of the better home ratings in the WNBA. It's not as high as I thought it was going to be. They're actually only like 6th in terms of home net rating. There's a lot of good home teams, but that split between home and road is the 3rd highest in the WNBA. So I would love to see what the Valkyries look like when they have to go on the road now that their lineup is coming back from Eurobasket. Congratulations to Team Belgium, by the way. What a freaking finish in that final. But
that might have been the game of the weekend, Sabreena. We're not going to say that for another show.
No, if you guys can go listen to the final call in that game, it's worth the listen. It is a crazy, just crazy energy.
Belgium-Spain, we should say. Final, yeah.
Belgium-Spain, yep. Mm-hmm.
Just seeing the way the Valkyries have executed at home, I'm just so enamored with that building, the vibe, the atmosphere that they've created in year one, and I don't necessarily doubt the Valkyries on the road, but I'm curious how much of their success has been catapulted by just what an incredible atmosphere that is versus how much the team is still coming together. So now that they're going on the road, it's going to be a very interesting test for them.
Yeah, I'm really happy we're talking about the Golden State Valkyries, because the day that we're recording this, the WNBA has announced those 3 teams, right? Cleveland, Philadelphia, and Detroit. And we're talking about expansion teams. And the larger story going into this season was we have no idea what to expect with the Golden State Valkyries. Not only we don't have an idea what to expect from what's going to be the product out on the court, but also we don't know what to expect for the vibe. How is the city going to, how is the Bay, how are they going to, take in this team? Sure, I think everyone knew that there was going to be some level of support, because the Bay has always wanted women's basketball, pro women's basketball especially, to come and take root here. But I don't know if anyone had a true understanding of the atmosphere that has been created at Valhalla. And now this is an opportunity for us to talk about what could possibly happen in these new cities as some of them return a team, and then some of them will have the opportunity to take new routes. So let's talk about it on the other side of this break. So it's official. Cleveland will be the next WNBA expansion team, set to start in 2028, followed by Detroit in 2029 and Philadelphia in 2030. Whew, that's crazy. We haven't mentioned, remember, Portland and Toronto are still coming too. They're just coming a little bit sooner. So Ben, you were literally in the room at the WNBA NBA headquarters in Midtown Manhattan this morning for the announcement. Let us know what happened. How did it go down?
Yeah, it was a pretty exciting day for a lot of people in the WNBA NBA offices in Midtown Manhattan. A lot of people from each of the respective groups have piled into basically one room. There was about 10 to 15 media members also in attendance. And we kind of waited and we waited. Actually, some Miles Davis, the waiting music in the WNBA offices, for those who care, is a lot like, kind of your Airlines Jazz. Both some Miles Davis, he's better than Airlines Jazz, I should say, but just other kind of instrumental jazz. But that's neither here nor there. That's not why people came for this show. And then suddenly representatives from maybe it is. Look, I mean, we can talk Airlines Jazz as much as people want in future episodes. But then representatives from each of the 3 teams got up on stage next to Kathy Engelbert, and they began this kind of proceeding where, Kathy gave some introductory remarks. Jess Sims was the host of it. And then, each of the 3 teams had people from their respective groups and cities get up and speak and just talk about how excited they all were for what is to come in the future for both this kind of milestone and momentous day in the present, and what it all means for, their ownership groups, their cities, their fan base. As you mentioned, Zena, for 2 of these teams, in Detroit and in Cleveland, these are, former WNBA markets. Both of these franchises or cities had franchises kind of in the early to mid 2000s. In the case of Detroit, all the way up until, I want to say 2008, 2009. But for Philadelphia, this is a totally new market. So they have their own level of excitement without this kind of shared history in the WNBA. So there's a lot to get into, but then it just became a lot of people talking, media talking to representatives, different press conference scrums, people from different groups, just whoever was there, just all kind of talking about the moment that was on Monday morning.
Did you feel like there was like a general consensus of excitement around this? Like, I feel like I know a lot of people are really excited about it, period, because there's growth in the WNBA of any sort, right? Whether it's roster expansion and city expansion. I think anytime you see growth in the W, you're really happy about it. However, there could be feelings of like, where's the South? Where's the South representation, right? Or, maybe some folks felt like... Yeah, right. The middle of the country for one. Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that, maybe some folks wanted roster expansion before they wanted a city expansion. Like, as you walked around the room, as you were hearing conversations, like what were some of the things that you heard about how people were reacting and responding to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is kind of our jobs as reporters in the room, both on a day like Monday and also for the many weeks and months and years to come as this process or for each of these teams plays out, to continue to ask those questions. For the people in the room, they were really excited. Like, Detroit was stoked that they had just gotten a WNBA team that they were announcing. Cleveland, they started to actually sell season tickets and I believe some merchandise too on Monday afternoon right away, like shortly after the announcement. So they were excited about just the initial flood of interest. Same with Philadelphia, right? Knowing what is to come. Like, the people in the room were very much trying to think positive. Now, if you were part of the Nashville ownership group or the Kansas City ownership group or the Houston ownership group, and we'll talk about them specifically a little bit later, like, I'm not sure what your reaction is to the news. I mean, personally, like, I wasn't totally surprised that the WNBA elected to go to 18 teams. I think Kathy Engelbert had been pretty clear, and she's often, very intentional in her language, that they were wanting to expand to at least 16 teams by 2028. And when suddenly you saw more than 10 cities submitted bids by this end of January deadline, thinking about what the expansion fee rather could be, knowing how much interest there was, knowing that, these are a lot of well-financed groups who want to get involved with the league, some of which are already NBA owners, like, it wasn't totally shocking that the league made a decision to go to 18. What I think is interesting is that they announced it all in one swoop on one day. That, I think, further built to the excitement. But then, of course, they make the decision to roll it out year over year. So, yeah, I mean, look, I don't, like, if you're living in Miami right now, there's no WNBA team coming there, and we'll see if there ever one, like there ever will be. I guess that's why you have Unrivaled, if you are a fan of women's basketball down in the South Florida market.
So just speaking of expansion fees real quick, I think you mentioned, you reported in the newsletter that went up on The Athletic yesterday that the fee for each of these teams is $250 million, right?
Yeah.
So if we think about Golden State entering the league in 2025 and their expansion fee was $50 million, and now Cleveland in 2028 going all the way to $250 million, why would you let Detroit and Philadelphia come in at that price now when theoretically you could wait longer and potentially drive that up even further?
That's a great question, Sabreena. And honestly, that was, one I don't think we have a firm answer to. I think what was clear about the kind of process that went on here, Philly is the most interesting from a why 2030 perspective, I would say, because Philly's 2030 start date is very much tied to a new arena that they are planning to build in Philadelphia, right? And so there's this new arena that was announced, I believe, earlier this winter that the Philly ownership group, and we should say that group is the Harris Blitzer Group. They're the same owners who own the NBA's Philadelphia 76ers. They have plans to build this new arena and open it by 2031 was the initial projection. Their hope is what Josh Harris said is, who's the managing partner of the group. He said that, like, we've told everyone that the new arena is set to open in 2031. They're sticking to that, but now they're kind of putting some pressure on themselves to get it open by 2030. So they're kind of hoping to do that by then, and that is why there's such a long runway on the Philadelphia part of this process. So, Cleveland, Kathy Engelbert said, she didn't want to say if there was one that was the first choice or the first one that they decided upon, but she did say that, like, they were ready now was basically, Cleveland was ready now was a direct quote from her. They have, again, an NBA arena. We should say NBA arenas, these full-size big arenas. All three of these teams do. Detroit is going to play in Little Caesars where the Pistons play. Cleveland, that franchise is going to go, is building new practice facility for the NBA's Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs will move there. And the current facility that the Cavs use, which is a really beautiful, and I want to say relatively new facility too, that's where the WNBA team. So kind of answering your question about timeline, like, they made a decision to announce it all now. They had looked at the bids in January. They said they came to a number first. We want 3 new teams. And then they were like, okay, we're going to pick these 3. And so they kind of did it all in one swoop as a result.
Now, the fees before, at least, looking at Portland, looking at Toronto, and their fees to enter the WNBA included the fee for a facility. And I guess that wasn't the case for the Golden State Valkyries because they already had their facilities incorporated. For the teams that are the NBA teams that are basically allowing their WNBA teams to utilize their facilities, does the financing of that not get incorporated into the $250 million? I guess I'm trying to figure out what is included in that 250 if you already have facilities included.
Yeah, I think the 250 is just an expansion fee. It's basically a get into the league fee for an owner in both the WNBA and the NBA, because we should say that because of how the leagues are structured, like NBA owners also financially profit as a result of WNBA expansion. The 250 is like the get in the door fee. And then these teams are obviously going to spend a lot more money for everything that goes into it, right? Detroit is going to build a new... Yeah.
How does that differ from the get in the door fee that Toronto and Portland paid, I guess?
In terms of which numbers? Yeah, you guys, Sabreena.
So,
well, I know Golden State's $50 million was an expansion fee. And then Portland had a number that was reported around $115 million, but I think about 60 of that was the expansion fee, and the remainder of it was dedicated towards that practice facility that the Thorns and the Portland WNBA team are building together. Right. The Toronto number was also reported in concert, facility with the expansion fee put together, but like Ben was saying, these $250 million seem like straight up expansion fees, so all of that money goes to the NBA WNBA umbrella. And we should specify that because the NBA owns 42% of the WNBA, they get 42% of that. The 16% goes to that capital raise group that was conducted in 2021, and then the remainder of that 42% goes to the actual WNBA owners. So there's some double dipping there. Obviously there are NBA owners who are WNBA owners and so on and so forth, but that $750 million doesn't just all go into WNBA operations. It gets split further. Yeah.
Got you. Okay, so now I'm looking at the cities that were chosen. Of course, we just mentioned Miami. There's also Charlotte that had a team formerly, the Charlotte Sting. And of course, we see the Detroit Shock, their history kind of being brought back to the forefront. But there's another team, the Houston Comets, that are not in this conversation. And then on top of it, there's all the teams that had bids in. We mentioned Nashville. We mentioned Kansas City. Why these cities over the others?
It's a good question, and we should say that you rattled off some of the cities who did not get awarded teams. We'll hit some of the news that came out of Monday, too. I mean, Kathy Engelbert wanted to get to 18 clearly by the end of 2030, the end of the decade. It is a safe bet that if and when the WNBA expands next, that Houston will be on that list. She point blank said today, I guess on Monday during her availability, that, quote, Houston would be up next for sure. There might be opportunities there, and then went on to say that, they wanted to take our time to evaluate the right number to go to by the end of the decade. She then was asked if that was a kind of formal declaration that the WNBA would be going to Houston. She pushed back on that notion, but she did then go on to acknowledge the history that they have. She also mentioned Houston specifically in her public press conference that she gave that anyone could have watched. So it's pretty clear Houston, which also has an NBA owner in Tillman Fertitta, is of interest to the WNBA as a future landing spot. When that happens, whether it's 2031, 32, beyond, who knows? But if you're a Houston Comets fan, not the news you wanted this week to start your 2025 summer, but doesn't seem like all is lost. To the question then, Zena, of why these respective cities, I mean, I think it came down to a number of factors, and the league likes to say it's like 20, 25 factors. They're looking at psychographics, demographics, what other graphics are there, Sabreena? You used to be a teacher. Like, throw out some graphics. I don't know, visual graphics. Like, what else are they studying when they come to their analysis?
I don't even know
here?
what the word psychographics mean. I've heard Kathy use it like 35 times.
They're just,
I'm sure there's a geographical aspect too of like where these facilities will be and where these. Okay, that makes sense. We can add that too. Geographics.
All of it. Geographics is definitely one of them. I mean, they're looking at all this data, and they're also looking at ownership investment. Obviously, like how much money is an ownership group going to pour into the team. They're looking at facilities is clearly important, and it has been important throughout this entire wave of expansion. Right? Think about Golden State, Chase Center, where the Valkyries where they play. We mentioned that's a pretty new arena. When did it open, Zena? In
2019.
2019. A pretty new arena, right? They renovated, poured a ton of money into their practice facility, which you've seen firsthand, which is beautiful.
Absolutely gorgeous. Stunning.
Right. Toronto.
The Sephora Performance Center.
Right. Sephora Performance Center. Toronto, building a new practice facility, I believe,
Right next to
has
the
a
Raptors
world-class,
facility.
NBA arena. Portland, Sabreena mentioned it. They have this facility that they're going to share, that they're going to build this new complex with the Thorns of the NWSL for practice. There are renovations currently going on Moda Center as well to spruce up that arena in that city. And then you have the three that I just rattled off with either new arenas and or new practice facilities and or plans to do that. And so like creating world-class environments for players clearly, seems like a non-negotiable as this process progressed.
And it does seem like that is why teams that have NBA ties feel like they continue to come to the forefront.
Right.
You already have these facilities. You also are well aware of what it takes to be able to provide the materials and resources necessary for a professional athlete to feel like they are being well taken care of. So it'll be interesting what smaller ownership groups do, or ownership groups that are outside of the NBA. Portland Thorns, I think, is like an interesting one, but still being able to play at Moda Center, that is still a tie to an NBA arena.
Toronto is not actually playing at an NBA arena. They're playing at the Coca-Cola Center, which is like a 10 to 12,000 capacity arena. Yeah.
Well, we should say,
note, yes.
And we should say too, like, this is what I asked Kathy at her public press conference. I mean, I asked her basically what was her message to non-NBA affiliated teams that bid. And that might want to bid going forward. And she kind of cited that both Toronto and Portland are not technically NBA affiliated teams. However, the ownership group of the Raptors, I believe it's Larry Tannenbaum of Kilmer Sports Group, of this WNBA team, Toronto WNBA, they also have ties. They were the majority partner and now they might be a minority partner. Whatever, they have some stake in the NBA Raptors, and Portland's group is the Bethal family. They are minority partners, or a member of their family is with the NBA Sacramento Kings. Now, she said, she cited them as kind of non-technical affiliates, and that is true, right? They're not like the Liberty and the, and the Nets, for instance, or the Valkyries and the Warriors. But like Teresa Resch, who is the president of the Toronto WNBA team, where did she come from previously? Take a guess, folks. She came from the Toronto Raptors, right? Like, we're seeing some shared resources there already. So the message, I think you can kind of conclude what you want, and it's certainly something we have our eyes on going forward about. Is this the end of totally non-affiliated groups without NBA ties?
We'll see, especially as it continues to grow.
Real quick, with NBA ownership, if you're a little cynical, as I am, about all of these NBA owners getting back into the W, you'd be, I think, perfectly justified in that, because the WNBA and NBA originally started as completely shared ownership groups in 1997 when the league debuted. And the reason why all of these teams contracted or, moved to separate locations, the Detroit Shock are one of those who ended up moving to Tulsa, and now they're the Dallas Wings, was because the NBA owners decided they wanted out, even though that WNBA expenditures was probably just a fraction of what they were spending on NBA teams that were probably losing a lot more money there. You think about the Buss family getting rid of the Los Angeles Sparks, or the Cleveland Rockers disbanding, or, Detroit or Orlando, or a whole bunch of other teams, the Portland Fire, right? Like, who are under the same ownership as the Portland Trailblazers. And so for all of the NBA teams who have like cried about how the WNBA doesn't make them any money and how they are, why are we still propping this thing up for the last decade, now just want back in, is I guess they just recognize the business proposition here, but it's a little disappointing to see the WNBA just allowing this to happen all over again when you look at the very recent history of the WNBA and how poorly this went the first time around.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the blessing and the curse of the WNBA growth and expansion is that everyone wants back in. Everyone wants to be a part of it, understandably, because it is growing, it is hot, it is fire, it is also a product right now that everyone feels is authentic. Like we just talked about that Lynx Dream game. That is the regular season game that felt like playoff basketball. And I think a lot of people have looked at, other products, particularly across at the NBA side, and they're like, some of these regular season games don't kick the way they used to. It doesn't hit the same way until the playoffs. I think the regular season was wonderful, but I've heard that folks think that about the NBA. So you go to a WNBA game and the season is so short, every game feels so detrimental to where you want to end up towards the end of the season. So those games mean so much more. And that product, I think everyone wants to be a part of. Owners are starting to see it. On that note, though, I will say I'm a little biased here in the Bay. I do love that the ownership of the Golden State Valkyries was someone that got their team taken away. Joe Lacob had the San Jose Lasers. And the ABA folded going into the WNBA, and so he wasn't able to get his team. So that actually feels good that this was an owner that always wanted to be in the WNBA space, and now it finally is. Let's keep it going, though. This is a great insight into the actual announcement day, Ben, but now we got to actually talk about what this looks like in practice, because that is the most interesting part that, we're really excited about. In theory, this is awesome. But in practicality, if we're being realistic, what does this look like in terms of having 18 teams by 2030, but as of right now, still 12 roster spots, right? What does that actually, lay out to? And Sabreena, I want to start with you because this is something that we've talked a little bit about on this show, about the new talent coming in from the international perspective. We just looked at this draft that went through. We've looked at many years of drafts come through, and these rookies get drafted and then they get cut, they get waived. This seems like it's a good thing. There's now more spaces, right, available in the league. But what would you say to that? How would you kind of lay it out?
You coming back to play, Zena? Are you going to come back? They're looking for.
I think you need to have a long conversation with my knees. They would probably tell you absolutely the hell not. My mind and my heart would be like, yeah, finally, everybody's on board. They see the vision. But yeah, the rest of my body would be like, absolutely not. So let's think about it though, because there's some players that would love some spots, some older players, right, that come to mind that feel like they kind of got forced out a little early because there just wasn't enough spots. Who knows? It feels like this is a good thing, but I'm also like, is this too much too soon? What do you think?
Yeah, I think they could go in a lot of different directions. I'm going to start with the roster spot question. For years when the WNBA only had 12 teams, it was a common refrain for players saying like, oh, we have a whole extra league just training at home, right? All the players who have been cut, who aren't able to find a place to, stay on a roster. And admittedly, when it was at 144, I think you could sufficiently say there was more talent beyond the WNBA that could play at a WNBA level. And you think about not only the college players who couldn't make their way back in the league, like you said, Zena, older players who were forced out, to make room for the younger players, European players, like all of that adds to the pool. I think part of the draw of the WNBA, though, in that stretch, and you think about the quality of the league, is its exclusivity. The fact that it is the toughest league in the world to make, that necessarily creates a higher quality of play, right? And yes, there are players who probably could be, in that, let's say, like lower 25th percentile of players and make a WNBA roster, and there's not enough spots currently for them, and they could find a way onto a roster now when there was going to be 5 more teams by the end of the decade. But that's going to dilute, I think, the quality of the individual teams, right? Superstars are going to get more spread out. And I don't know that you can consistently say that this is the toughest league in the world to make if you keep adding more and more teams. So The branding changes a little bit, I think. Anytime there's expansion, you have to worry about, is everyone going to meet the standard that this league has already set? And maybe it's one thing when you add 1, 2, 3 teams. When you add from 12 to 18, that's you're increasing the size of the league by 50%, right? That's an enormous number of people who are being added to the league. And I'm not saying that people can't eventually get to that level. I just think that there's, an expectation that there's going to be some growing pains, right? It's going to take some time to find a stable of players who can meet the standard that the WNBA set when it was a league of 144. And so that's the first thing that sort of came to my mind is like, oh my God, there are so many teams that are going to be added, so many roster spots, and yet we're still at a situation where I'd imagine most teams have 12 and we're in the, can we carry 11? Can we carry 12? Like, where are the hardship players going to come from? Where are they going to come from now that they're all going to actually be on rosters? So the pace at which this is all happening is a little concerning to me.
It does feel like, Ben, that the conversation around depth, right, what Sabreena's alluding to, seems like there won't be much depth because it's all going to be, they're going to be rostered. They're going to be on teams. They're going to have jerseys on. But there's also this element of like, let's look at the last expansion team. Let's look at the Golden State Valkyries and some of these 6 women of the year that now have an opportunity to showcase their ability to be stars. What are your thoughts on the expansion could actually reveal some stars that might be kind of sitting on some benches? What's your thought to what Sabreena's talking about in terms of this could dilute the quality of play?
I mean, it definitely could reveal some stars, but you're going to add 60 players to the league over the course of the expansion process, at least, right? 12 times 5, I guess, at maximum. Mm-hmm. Not all those players are going to be stars, right? Some of those players, as Sabreena mentioned, like might not be ready just yet to, be in what was the hardest league to crack out there. And so Sabreena's right that it will be really interesting to monitor how, who, enters the league when, right? We should say like this decision, what is going on right now, it occurs amid an ongoing CBA negotiation, right? Does anything change in terms of when players can literally enter the league, right? Like, do you have to stay in college 4 years? Are they going to change draft eligibility rules? Like, I don't have any reporting firsthand on that now, but it begs an interesting question about, that as a potential change, right? The length of the season, how does that, how is that affected by the decision to go, to 18 teams by 2030? Right now, right, we're at a 44 game schedule. It's already a record, and it will continue to grow. And this is something that is renegotiated. What is the footprint of the season? What does it look like in an Olympic year, right? When the league suddenly takes a few week break during the Olympics. Like, these are all some of the logistical questions that come with scale. And Kathy Engelbert used the word scale during one of the scrums she gave, but she really talked about it in the context of when you're a sports league, you need scale. And how do you get scale? You get scale by more teams, right? Some could argue that right now, maybe should the WNBA have gotten more scale by scaling up its current roster size from 12 to 15. That's an argument, obviously, we have seen. From a labor standpoint, too, what I think is so interesting is, like I mentioned it, there's an ongoing negotiation right now. We'll see when that deal, if and when it gets signed. It wouldn't be crazy that by the time Philadelphia entered the WNBA, they were renegotiating another deal. Right? I know it's like a long ways out, but like, there's opportunity there with the potential opt-out in the deal to come that like they're talking again and trying to learn from some of the progress and some of the mistakes and shortcomings of the agreement that hasn't even been signed yet. Like, that's how long we are talking down the road. So, it is going to be a gradual process. And I think the league is kind of resting on that idea. We're discussing that idea as it relates to expansion to try and kind of answer the question Sabreena had about dilution talent. But, we're going to sit back in 2030 or 2031. And I think, like, we'll have to see, like, what does it look like? And especially because the high talent pool right now, the WNBA, is part of what I think so many fans are gravitating to, right? Just like all the stars on so many teams, how loaded all these rosters are.
The labor question is really interesting. I think it sort of speaks to, like, why the WNBA wanted to announce all of these teams now, because they're going into negotiation with, we just brought in $750 million in expansion fee. We just created 36 more new roster spots. What are you, the players, going to bring to the table in this case? So that, I think that answers why they're willing to potentially sacrifice some money on the back end to have this negotiating advantage, so to speak, as they work through this current collective bargaining agreement. So that labor is a really good point.
And that's a really good point, Sabreena, because, this whole CBA situation, the players are going to be obviously asking for the main point of fair pay. And we can talk about that in a different show. But they also are going to be asking for things about player welfare. And more teams, to me, and anyone, means more games. And when you think about more games, that's also talking about the schedule. How do we think that these teams being added into the mix will impact the ways in which the WNBA fits into the sports calendar? And let's be real, it's not just sports calendar, because the WNBA games overlay, the concerts and all the summer things that happen at these particular arenas that they play in. How will this work?
A good thing about the NBA owners coming in is that they have control over their arenas, right? So they have more say in the dates and can accommodate more WNBA games because, they're the ones who make the calendars, unlike some of the arenas that existing WNBA teams play in. Their ownership does not control the arena. They're at the behest of, whatever that group decides. So that's a good thing, as you're going to expand the footprint of the WNBA calendar. To have control over how often, when you can play is a good thing. But we mentioned labor, like, this is going to be a point of negotiation, right? The players have to play more games if there are more teams. That is a concession you're going to have to make if you want to make more money too. Does it go to 50 games? Does it go beyond 50 games? Like, are we talking about starting the season earlier? That seems like it'd be even harder for college players, frankly. Are you going to start the season or end the season later and, dip further into football and like go up against the World Series with baseball? Like, all of these are considerations that the WNBA has to make, because I don't think it makes a lot of sense to just add more games to the current May to October space, because we already have players complaining about what physical toll that is taking on their bodies.
Well, it also begs the question too about conference alignment, right? Do you go back to conference alignment, and do you, factor that more, heavily into how the schedule is made? Like, literally, do you change how many times a team plays a certain team that is in their conference or not? Like, do you add divisions in a certain way? Like, there are some of these big questions that, as the league expands, it's a big one. To Sabreena's point about expanding the literal footprint, think about the fall, for instance, right? Right now, the WNBA finals end around, I want to say, like October 18th, October 20th, or they did last year, right? ESPN is currently broadcasting ABC the finals. Well, they are also a lead rights holder on college games, right? And so, like, you suddenly have two properties that might butt up against each other even more than they already do. There's just a lot of the kind of opportunities, I guess, for more conflict. Think about if the Detroit Pistons were to go on a big, a run throughout the playoffs, the finals, and a deep playoff run in, 2029. Cade Cunningham's leading everything. Or, if Houston were to get a team, Jabari Smith maybe down the road. See, we had to sneak him in
Smith Jr.
To the podcast. Jabari Smith Jr. recently re-signed.
Right.
Maybe the Houston team in 2030, if that ever existed, or 2033 rather. Or who knows who's going to be playing on the Philadelphia 76ers in 2030, right? Like, the conflicts of schedule, it's just ripe for conflict.
Yeah.
And we, people are already starting to, you're seeing it in the Bay Area right now, Zena. What happens if the Valkyries make the playoffs? I think we're a long way away from that. I know everyone wants to pencil them in, but like, those conversations are starting to be had. It seems like you're asking people about that, or people are talking about it. Like, fans care a lot about that. And it's a terrible look optically when, your team, your WNBA team, is in the playoffs, and we have seen this in past years, and they are, in essence, relegated to a secondary arena for their most important games. Like, that's a thing of, people hope that is a thing of WNBA past, not a thing of WNBA future.
And just to back up on when you were talking about conference alignment, like, in the NBA, it makes sense. You got 30 teams, and you can't afford to play every single person the full amount of times that you would play them. So you only play the folks in your conference or on your side, whether, East and West, you play them a certain amount of times. I think it's like five times or so. And then within the actual, when you go over to the opposite conference, you only play them twice a year. So there's much less opportunities for you to play people across your conference, just so that you're not having so many games throughout the year. I really want to know how this is all going to play out, because it's one of those things where sometimes you can get ahead of yourself and get so excited about the growth that you don't quite see the trees in the forest, right? And you don't quite see how this is all going to play out. And we're already seeing players complaining about this schedule. So we don't know what's going to happen when it comes to next year. But let's talk a little bit about these franchises that are coming back around, and they're having kind of like a second chance, a second coming, essentially. Two of the cities that previously had WNBA teams, Detroit had the Detroit Shock from 1998 when the league was starting, and 2009 is when they folded, went to Tulsa, then became Dallas, as Sabreena mentioned earlier, and then the Cleveland Rockers from 1997 to 2003. Cleveland folded. And Detroit won 3 titles before it moved. I'm wondering what makes it different this time around for particularly these 2 teams that existed right when the league started.
I mean, one of the big changes is ownership, right? Different people at the top of these respective organizations. For the case of Cleveland, for instance, Gordon Gund was the original owner of that WNBA franchise. He also owned the Cleveland Cavaliers at the time. Eventually, he grew disinterested in the Cleveland WNBA franchise, the Rockers. And also, he would sell the NBA franchise to Dan Gilbert and co., the owner of the NBA's Cleveland Cavaliers. And so 20 years later or so, Dan Gilbert, who, had first purchased the Cavs, now also is going to be the majority owner of the Cleveland WNBA team. Sabreena made the point, like, a lot has just changed in the WNBA from 20 years ago to today, right? Think about just how different the business is more generally, and all the record ratings and merchandise and, corporate partnerships and all the things that have changed. That really at its core, whether it is for Detroit and Cleveland or Philadelphia, is what is different. And what is so interesting is, not that many years ago, Kathy Engelbert was talking about how the COVID season, the 2020 bubble season, was this existential moment for the WNBA, right? That they needed to basically play that season, or else, like, who knows what would have happened to the league. They said that they couldn't have been out of the conversation for 20 months. And you can actually go back and read, Mike Vorkunov and I reported out a story last fall all about how this capital raise that followed in 2021, it was a $75 million capital raise. Sabreena mentioned it too. They had all these people buy in. That really helped lay some of the foundation for, like, the business evolutions that have transpired over the last 4 or so years. Like, even as many as 5 years ago, the WNBA business was in a totally different spot. And right now it is, setting records all the time. And that is really the backdrop for the expansion that we saw this week.
Sabreena, how is it going to feel for the fans? Are people, especially if they don't bring back the same names, will it feel different in terms of the team coming back?
I think it's a great question for those individual communities. We talked about this a little bit with Portland as well, who all indications are that they are going to bring back the name Portland Fire, which is what they were from 2000 2003. And there are mixed feelings in the community about that, right? There's some elements of nostalgia, but also, does this era demand a different conception of what this team is going to be like, right? And Cleveland, still home to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Obviously, the Rockers make a lot of sense as a name if they were to bring that back. Detroit is interesting because technically the franchise still exists in just a different form with the Dallas Wings. So, you'll have to explore, like, who owns all of the history of that franchise, right? Does it all revert back to Detroit? It's a question that NBA fans are also sort of grappling with if the Seattle Supersonics ever return, right? Like, how does Oklahoma City?
Sabreena, where do you fare on that?
I think that if you change the name and the city, then you no longer get to attach yourself to the previous existence. Yeah. So I mean, I think a lot of people are just really happy to be back in the WNBA business, right? Like, to have a team back. That they're so close to other teams is a question in and of itself, right? Like, Detroit, pretty close to Toronto. Like, I don't know why we needed all these teams in the same area, but I think it's I mean, who am I going to begrudge fans who want to have a team back, right? Like it's great. The people in Detroit get to watch a basketball team again, and Philadelphia is an entirely new market, one that we've been talking about for a very long time. Uh, I part of me is like, why is there this lack of imagination that we have to just try the same things over and over again? That didn't work the first time, but it is different ownership groups, right? We are in a different space economically, than that recession in 2008 that took out a lot of these teams. So I'm trying to be more optimistic than that.
Well, listen, let's be optimistic on the other side of this break as we think up some new names for these WNBA teams that are coming on board. Well, in keeping with the expansion theme, we're going to do a quick, fun little exercise here. It's going to be some live brainstorming. We got 3 new teams, and let's imagine that they get 3 new names. Let's imagine that the owners of these teams have heard Sabreena say, this is a new era. We should have a new concept, a new, let's get our imaginations going, and let's go ahead and help them out, Ben and Sabreena. Let's start with Cleveland, okay? Previously, the Cleveland Rockers, alluding to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as Sabreena just mentioned. But let's think of some new stuff, okay? The most recent team that they received, baseball, Cleveland Guardians, got it. Thinks about the bridge statues in Cleveland. Thinking about protective and strong, okay. Then you've got the Cavaliers, same vibe, protective and strong. I like that. What are we thinking for Cleveland? Thinking that they're industrial, that they've got some grit to them. I don't know. What are we thinking here, guys?
This is more esoteric than I ever expected to be in terms of the culture of Cleveland, but.
I mean, trying to get the vibe into the name.
So if you want to, mesh nostalgia with, looking forward, if you still have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, this is courtesy of our friend Chantel Jennings, our coworker here. Could you make a play on the word pick with pick and roll, but guitar picks? I don't know what Unrivaled's trademark situation is, but the Cleveland vinyl also makes a lot of sense in terms of records.
Oh, right. I like that. Okay. So I like that, actually. I don't know. Cleveland Picks would sound good, though. Is is Chantel saying the Cleveland Picks? Is that
maybe a pick is a logo, in terms of.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Well,
Cleveland was also
some
apparently the
people
first
might
city.
call it a pick, like a hair pick, though.
Sure.
Like an afro pick. So I don't know. That might be a little confusing. But
another
I do like the
Cleveland
Cleveland
fact,
vinyl.
They were apparently the first city lit by electricity, so you could go with Cleveland Voltage. Cleveland Current. Current is a name that is occupied by an NWSL team, but I think there's obviously room for sharing that, especially because their current is more of a water situation. This is an electric current. But I think,
and we know that there's overlaps in different leagues. Yeah, I like that. I was thinking more around the industrial vibe of it, and I was like the Cleveland Forge, or the I don't know, Cleveland, the Cleveland Grit. I don't know, something like that gives that industrial vibe to it. But I really like Cleveland Vinyl now that I think about it. Maybe just because there's a lot of V's, and that just, I don't know, that sounds good. Ben, anything to add here?
I mean, feels like they're gonna play off the NBA name some form or fashion. Cavalier is a term from the English Civil War, so maybe they go back into some English Civil War history, or also a dog, right? A dog breed, a Cav, right? And so maybe they go in the dog variety.
What were the women in the English Civil War named?
Honestly, I just remember Cavaliers. I'm forever scarred because when I was in 6th grade, I've long prided myself on knowing mascots and college teams and mascots and just nicknames for teams, and I'll never forget. I was in the 6th grade in a history class, and our teacher was explaining the English Civil War, and she was like, this side was called the same thing as the University of Virginia's nickname. And in that moment, I blanked. And you can see, all these years later, it eats at me. I remember the pain from that story. So had she said NBA nickname, I would have gotten it in a second. I should have gotten it back then, but I'll never forget the Cavaliers in the English Civil War.
Okay. Let's keep going on this. I like this. I like this a lot. I like that we're going from very different vibes, okay? We're going music, we're going the feel of the city, we're going history here. We could call them the Cleveland Pioneers, could we?
It's not bad. It's not bad.
It's not bad though. It's not bad. Okay, let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. Let's think about Detroit, which I feel like could give the same vibe that I'm talking about than around Cleveland.
I mean, Detroit,
in
it's
terms
gotta
of
be Cars or Motown, right?
right. Cars.
What about the Detroit
Henry
Supremes?
Ford. That would be hilarious. And everyone has to show up in wigs that are perfectly bouffant and styled just like the Supremes. What? Oh, that would be phenomenal. And they would have to, I mean, they'd have to steal it from the Minnesota Lynx, but they would have to do some sort of the electric slide after every game as well. Get some sort of, I'm just imagining the Motown dancers on the background. I like it. I like it a lot. It makes sense why you had the Detroit Shock, right? You think about your car. Duh, that makes sense.
Pistons, Shock, yeah.
The Pistons Shock, exactly. Thinking about cars, the only thing that's coming to mind, and it's so dumb, but I keep thinking assembly line, like the Detroit Assembly. So bad, not good.
What Chantal? What do we have from our friend Chantal on this one?
Chantal also has Detroit Catalyst, Detroit Torque.
I like Torque.
Yeah.
Detroit Torque. Okay. Could we be obvious and say the Detroit Engines? Is that too on the nose?
Then you got to have Alyssa Thomas on your team, right?
Facts. That would be good. That would be good.
We should say too, the Detroit Pistons have an NBA G League affiliate, which are known as the Motor City Crews. So, again, history would tell us the car
vibe.
The car vibe will be applied in this context too.
I really think they should go the Supremes direction, though.
It's something to pay, like, Ruby D. Oh, maybe the Detroit Rubies? No, I'm thinking too many into
What
singers
is
right
Cleveland's
now. Okay.
G League team?
They were the Canton
Ooh.
Charge, I believe, right?
Charge.
Yes.
So the electric.
Okay. There you go.
I told you.
I like it.
I pride myself on knowing nicknames and mascots.
There you go. There you go. Okay. Yeah, I'm telling you, Detroit and Cleveland have the same kind of vibe here. So if Cleveland goes music, maybe Detroit goes car and industry. And if Detroit goes industry, maybe Cleveland goes music. We'll see. They got to balance it out somehow. I'm sure they're going to be in talks. Let's keep it going in Philadelphia, though. Philadelphia has a lot of opportunities here. Obviously, everything about Philadelphia is American-based. You got the Philadelphia Eagles. You got the 76ers, as in 1776.
Their G League team used to be the 87ers because of the Constitution being ratified in 87.
There you go. Wow. There's this element of American history with Philadelphia, and it makes sense. I very much remember being tortured in AAU by the Philadelphia Bells, which I think is still an active AAU like legendary
it is, yes.
program.
Brianna Stewart played for that team.
There you go. Yeah. Just to give you an example. Yeah, the Philadelphia Bells were always monstrous. And maybe, you can't take that. Also because it was very I don't know, a little too girly of a name. But I like the idea of the Philadelphia Liberty going off of the Liberty Bell, the Philadelphia Freedom.
You really liked Philadelphia Liberty, Zena? Can I stop you there?
Shoot, I don't know why I'm thinking about. Sorry. Not the Philadelphia Liberty, but thinking about in that realm, the Philadelphia Freedom, the Philadelphia something in that realm. Not Philadelphia Constitution, but you know what I mean.
I mean, it's a shame that the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, is in 1920 because you don't have a very good year with that. The 20 years doesn't have a ring to it.
But you could say Sabreena, we're on the same page here. You could say 17ers, right? That's kind of when the movement really popped up. And I want to say it was in 19 when I was just doing the research pre-show on this, when the 19th Amendment got passed was 1919. So 19ers it's not great, but feels like something in that vein could be in play.
Yeah,
the
I just thought it was
suffragettes?
the suffragettes. Yeah, that's honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the direction it went.
That would be no. I would suffer if they were called the Philadelphia Suffragettes. Nope. And by the way, guys, suffer has nothing to do with the word suffragettes. When I was first learning English and learning that word, I was like, that makes no sense. That suffragettes has something to do with voting and not suffering. Okay, I feel like we've suffered enough through this exercise. I don't know if we actually came up with any, but we would love to hear y'all's thoughts on these names. Should they go back? Should Cleveland and Detroit go back? I think Detroit folks would say absolutely bring back the Shock. I don't know if Cleveland would feel the same way about the Rockers, but let us know what you think. Should they go back? Should they come up with something new? And what should Philly do? Should they also find a bird that represents America? Because there's not anything like the eagle. But I feel like we're missing an opportunity in that category there. I don't know much about birds. But anywho, all right, guys, let's close this out. Don't forget, there is the Commissioner's Cup final tonight. Indiana Fever are going to face off against the Minnesota Lynx. Catch it all on Amazon Prime starting at 8 p.m. Eastern. Before we close out, we would be remiss to not say congratulations to Candace Parker, recently a guest on our show, but just got her jersey retired. Second time now with the Los Angeles Sparks, and unbelievable legacy, being honored, an icon in the game that really changed the game. If you want to know how she did so, go listen to our Power Forward conversation, because quite literally, she is the impetus of that conversation for sure. So that is it for today. We'll see you guys here back on Friday, where I can pretty much guarantee that we'll have a lot to talk about. And as always, before we go, use that thumb, use that index finger, y'all. Like, subscribe, share, all of the above. And also reach out to us. Let us know what you think about these names. Let us know what you think about these new teams. Is this going to fit the schedule? I want to know what you guys think about this, especially as the fans. Some of you that are just getting into it, you're probably like, yay. Some of you that have been here for a while, you're like, oh God, don't know what to expect. Definitely check it out and tell us what you think. And wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, subscribe, follow, all of the above. And head over to our partner, Yahoo Sports Hub. I always mess that up. The Yahoo Sports Hub. sports.yahoo.com/women's-sports. On behalf of The Athletic, Ben, Sabreena, and those terrible names we just came up with, I'm Zena Cada. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to No Off Season. To hear more, be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday.